You wake up in the dead of night. A weight presses against your chest. You can't move. You can't scream. And then, in the corner of your room, you see it. A figure, darker than the shadows, watching, waiting. You blink, and it's gone. But was it ever really there? Reports of shadowy figures lurking in the night have existed for centuries, whispered through folklore, recorded in religious text, and experienced by countless people across cultures and generations. They have been called many names: the Night Hag, the Dark Watchers, the Hat Man, the Djinn. Are they spirits, interdimensional beings, or something far more terrifying?
One of the weirdest and most frightening accounts I've heard. This fellow's name was John. He started to notice some strange things in his home. He started seeing fleeting movement out of his peripheral vision. Odd things started to happen. The fork would go flying off the table. Little things around the home. And he continued to try to dismiss it until he started seeing shadow beings directly. I mean, he was directly looking at them. They would be there one moment, the next moment they had vanished. They would be in another part of the room.
Tonight, we're diving deep into the enigma of shadow people, their origins, their appearances, and the chilling experience of those who have encountered them. We'll explore ancient legends, psychological theories, and even scientific explanations that may hold the key to this mystery. But beware, because the more you learn about them, the more likely they are to notice you. Have you ever woken up in the dead of night, your body frozen, your breath shallow, and an overwhelming sense of terror creeping over you? Have you ever felt the weight of something unseen pressing down on your chest, whispering, watching, waiting? If so, you may have encountered what has haunted human beings for centuries: the Night Hag. The Night Hag is a terrifying entity associated with sleep paralysis, a phenomenon that has plagued people across cultures, continents, and centuries. Descriptions vary, but one element remains consistent: an oppressive, dark presence looming over its victim, paralyzing them with fear. Some claim to see an old crone with hollow eyes and skeletal fingers. Others report shadowy figures, demonic creatures, or even familiar faces twisted in horrifying ways. To understand the Night Hag, we must first understand sleep paralysis. This terrifying experience occurs when the body transitions between sleep and wakefulness, often during REM sleep. The brain is awake, but the body remains temporarily immobilized. During this vulnerable state, hallucinations can manifest, intrusions of the dream world into waking reality. Neuroscientists link sleep paralysis to stress, irregular sleep patterns, and even genetics. But science alone cannot explain the depth of dread, the chilling consistency of Night Hag encounters, or why these entities seem to be aware of us. For as long as humans have dreamed, they have feared the Night Hag. The entity appears in culture worldwide, each with its own name and legend. In European folklore, she is an old witch who sits on the chest of her victims. In Scandinavian mythology, she is the mare, a sinister spirit responsible for nightmares. In Japan, the kanashibari, meaning bound in metal, describes a demonic force that holds its victims captive. The Caribbean and African diaspora tell of the hag riding, a malicious spirit that drains energy while the victim lies helpless. Even in ancient Mesopotamia, the demon Lilith was blamed for such nocturnal visitations. Is the Night Hag simply a trick of the mind, or something more? Many believe sleep paralysis is not just a neurological misfire, but a moment of spiritual vulnerability, when dark entities cross the veil. Paranormal researchers and demonologists argue that sleep paralysis experiences often align with reported demonic encounters: shadow figures, whispering voices, and overwhelming dread. Some victims claim these beings return night after night, feeding off fear and suffering. Are these hallucinations, or are they glimpses into another realm? People around the world have shared terrifying stories of the Night Hag. One man in Texas recalls waking up to an old woman crouched at the foot of his bed, grinning with jagged teeth. A woman in India describes a shadow figure pressing down on her, whispering in a language she couldn't understand. A teenager in Canada said he felt claws digging into his chest, only to wake up with red marks the next morning. Are these just nightmares, or something much darker? Whether scientific or supernatural, sleep paralysis can be terrifying, but there are ways to protect yourself. Sleep experts recommend maintaining a healthy sleep schedule, reducing stress, and avoiding sleeping on your back, positions commonly associated with sleep paralysis. For those who believe in spiritual warfare, prayers, protective charms, and cleansing rituals are used to ward off the Night Hag. Many report relief through faith, light, and positive energy. The Night Hag remains one of the most unsettling and universal experiences known to humanity. Whether a scientific phenomenon or a genuine encounter with the unknown, its presence in our collective nightmares cannot be denied. Perhaps the real question is not what the Night Hag is, but what it wants. Have you ever felt the weight of unseen eyes upon you? A presence lurking just beyond your sight? High in the fog-draped mountains of California, shadowy figures stand motionless, watching, waiting. They are known as the Dark Watchers, silent, towering figures that have haunted the region for centuries. But who, or what, are they? Long before the Spanish explorers arrived, the indigenous Chumash people spoke of shadowy figures in the mountains. Their stories tell of silent beings who watch from afar, never interacting, never interfering. Were they spirits, guardians of the land, or something more ominous? When Spanish settlers arrived in the 1700s, they too saw these figures. The name Los Vigilantes Oscuros, the Dark Watchers, was whispered among those who traveled the rugged trails. Men on horseback, priests, and soldiers alike described the same figures, towering silhouettes standing along ridgelines gazing out over the valleys below. The Watchers never moved, never chased, never spoke, yet those who saw them felt an undeniable presence, an unshakable feeling of being observed. And when approached, the figures would vanish. Even in modern times, reports of the Dark Watchers have not ceased. Hikers, campers, and park rangers still tell of encounters with shadowy figures, glimpsed just at the edge of vision. They describe tall, cloaked beings, silent and unmoving, watching from high above. Some claim they feel a deep sense of unease, an instinctual warning to leave the mountains before nightfall. One hiker recalls an experience deep in the Santa Lucia Mountains. He had been trekking through a secluded trail at dusk when he noticed a tall silhouette standing against the fading light. Thinking it was another hiker, he called out, but received no response. As he moved closer, the figure remained eerily still, and then, in the blink of an eye, was gone. No footsteps, no movement, just an empty ridge where the figure had once stood. Another witness, a lifelong Californian, swears she saw multiple watchers standing together in the early morning mist. They did not react to her presence, only stared into the distance. She turned away for a split second, and when she looked back, they had disappeared. Skeptics argue that the Dark Watchers are nothing more than illusions, tricks of the light and shadow. Scientists point to the phenomenon of pareidolia, where the human brain perceives familiar shapes and random patterns. Others suggest the broken spectre effect, a rare optical illusion in which a person's own shadow is cast upon mist, appearing enormous and otherworldly. But can all encounters be explained away so easily? The persistent nature of these sightings, spawning centuries and cultures, raises questions that science has yet to fully answer. If the Dark Watchers are mere tricks of the mind, why do so many describe the same eerie feeling, the same looming figures, the same inexplicable disappearances? The Dark Watchers share similarities with another mysterious phenomenon, shadow people. Reports of shadowy figures lurking in bedrooms, standing in doorways, or moving just beyond sight have been recorded across the world. Are these beings connected? Are the Dark Watchers simply another manifestation of the shadow figures seen in sleep paralysis episodes and late-night visions? Some believe they are interdimensional beings, existing between worlds, glimpsed only in fleeting moments. Others suspect they are echoes of the past, residual spirits bound to the landscape. Could it be that the Dark Watchers are neither good nor evil, but merely observing, watching something we cannot yet comprehend? Whatever they may be, the Dark Watchers remain a mystery. Are they guardians, omens, or simply illusions shaped by the rugged Californian landscape? The answer remains elusive, slipping through our grasp like the morning fog over the mountains. But one thing is certain, whether real or imagined, their legend endures, and as long as people wander through the lonely trails of the Santa Lucia Mountains, the Watchers will remain, standing silently, gazing into the unknown. If you ever find yourself in those mountains, pause for a moment, look to the ridgelines. You may just see them, standing in the distance, watching, waiting. Have you ever woken up in the dead of night, unable to move, your body frozen in place? Your breathing is slow and heavy, your heart pounding in your chest. You try to move, to scream, but no sound comes out. Then in the corner of your room he appears, a tall, shadowy figure. Some say he wears a hat, others describe a trench coat. He doesn't speak, he simply stands there, silent and unmoving, a presence so chilling it lingers long after he vanishes. This is the Hat Man. Across the world, reports of the Hat Man have surfaced, describing an eerily similar figure. He is often depicted as a tall shadow, darker than the darkness around him, standing silently at the edge of the room or looming over those who are paralyzed in bed. Unlike other shadow people, misty and amorphous forms that flicker and shift, the Hat Man appears solid, distinct, and deliberate in his presence. Many witnesses claim he wears a wide-brimmed hat, sometimes resembling a fedora or a top hat, with a long coat that drapes over his form. His face, if visible at all, is often featureless or glowing red-eyed. Unlike sleep paralysis hallucinations that fade quickly, encounters with the Hat Man seem to persist longer, sometimes even occurring outside the bedroom, following individuals through their waking lives. Some report feeling overwhelmed dread in his presence, while others say he exudes a malevolent intelligence, watching, studying. But why? The Hat Man is not a new entity. Though the name itself may be recent, figures resembling him appear in the folklore and mythology from different cultures. In European legends, shadowy figures in broad hats were associated with omens of death or spirits that observe from the veil of night. In Germanic folklore, figures like the Nachtmar, a night terror, share eerily similarities to modern accounts of the Hat Man. Some have drawn connections between the Hat Man and the Grinning Man, a similarly ominous figure reported in UFO encounters. Others compare him to the Slender Man, a fictional being that eerily mirrors the real-life accounts of shadowy entities stalking individuals. Could he be a relic of something ancient, a being that has always existed in the periphery of human experience, taking on different forms throughout the ages? Or is he something modern, an emergent product of our collective fears? Many researchers believe the Hat Man may be a product of sleep paralysis, a state in which the body remains mobilized upon waking or falling asleep, often accompanied by terrifying hallucinations. The brain caught between wakefulness and sleep creates vivid and horrifying figures as the mind struggles to interpret its surroundings. However, what makes the Hat Man so unusual is the consistency of the reports. Unlike other sleep paralysis visions that vary wildly between cultures and individuals, the Hat Man appears the same across decades and continents. This begs the question: is he merely a recurring hallucination, or something external making itself known during these vulnerable moments? For those who believe in the supernatural, the Hat Man is often associated with dark entities, perhaps even demonic presences. Some believe he is an interdimensional being slipping through the fabric of reality to observe and feed on fear. Others speculate that he is an echo of a past life, a spectral remnant of something long forgotten. In some cases, people report seeing him not just in dreams or paralysis, but in waking reality, lurking in hallways, reflected in mirrors, or appearing in times of extreme stress. Could he be a harbinger? A warning of impending doom? Some survivors of tragic events claim to have seen him shortly before the misfortune struck. The chilling part of the Hat Man phenomenon is how real it feels to those who have seen him. Here are some first-hand accounts from individuals who claim to have encountered him. A woman from Texas recalls waking to find the Hat Man at the foot of her bed, his wide-brimmed hat casting a long shadow across the room. She could feel his gaze, though he had no eyes. As soon as she gasped, he dissolved into the darkness. A man in Germany described seeing the Hat Man throughout his childhood, always watching from the corner of his bedroom. As he grew older, the sightings stopped, until one night he awoke in a hotel room to find the same figure standing by the door. A nurse in Canada shares that patients on the brink of death would often whisper about a man in a hat watching them from the shadows before they passed away. These stories and countless others suggest that whatever the Hat Man is, his presence is not random. He appears with purpose, leaving an impression that never truly fades. So what do we want to make of the Hat Man? Is he a figment of the mind, a mere trick of sleep paralysis, a shared archetype embedded in our collective unconscious? Or is he something more, something watching, waiting, lurking beyond the veil of our understanding? The truth remains elusive, much like the Hat Man himself. But whether he is real or not, the fear he instills is undeniable. And perhaps, just perhaps, if you close your eyes tonight, you may find yourself wondering, is he watching you too? Have you ever felt something watching you just beyond the edges of the firelight, a presence in the stillness of the woods, hidden within the deep shadow of an ancient tree? For the Choctaw people, these feelings are more than imagination. They are echoes of stories passed down through generations, whispers of spirits that linger in the night. The Choctaw people have long believed in a world beyond what the eyes can see, a place interwoven with the natural world where spirits move like the wind, sometimes benevolent, sometimes dangerous. Their stories passed down through oral tradition tell of beings that have existed since the beginning of time. One of the most well-known spirits is Alû, the great black being. His form is that of pure darkness, a shadow that moves without sound, a figure that feeds on fear itself. He is the embodiment of despair, slipping through the night like an unseen predator. If a person allows themselves to dwell too long in sorrow, it is said that Alû will find them, feeding on their sadness and growing even stronger. But Alû is not the only shadow that lingers in Choctaw myth. The Choctaw, or Big Man, is another being that haunts the deep forests and lonely paths. Some say he is a protector. Others whisper that he is an omen. Those who see his form standing motionless in the distance know they're about to face something life-changing. For the Choctaw, the night is alive with unseen forces. The shadows hold more than darkness. They conceal spirits with unknown intentions. One such entity is an Alû, the long black being. Its body is tall and thin, so elongated that it seems unnatural. It moves with a slithering grace, approaching those who stray too far from the village. Its voice is never heard, but its presence is known. Those who see an Alû often experience an overwhelming dread, as if their very soul is being drawn from them. Some claim that to gaze too long at this entity is to lose a piece of oneself forever. Another legend tells of the Impa, the soul eater. This spirit does not take the body, but instead preys upon the mind and spirit, leaving its victims hollow and lost. The Choctaw believe that the best way to protect oneself from such entities is to maintain a strong spirit, to never allow fear to take root, for fear is the doorway through which these beings matter. But not all spirits in Choctaw lore are sinister. Some serve as guides, as protectors, watching over those who remain respectful of the natural world. One such guardian is the Shalom Bish, or spirit shadow. Every person, it is said, has a Shalom Bish, an essence that lingers even after the body is gone. Some believe that these spirits can return to offer guidance, whispering in dreams, leaving signs along the path of those they loved in life. Others say that Shalom Bish can be trapped, lingering too long in sorrow, unable to move forward. Then there are the Kawi Anukasha, the little people, tricksters, helpers, watchers of the forest. They are small, nimble, and elusive. If they favor you, they may guide you to safety, leaving small signs or whispers in the wind. But if you offend them, they are known to play tricks, leading travelers astray, hiding important belongings, or even appearing in dreams to teach lessons the hard way. The stories of the Choctaw are more than myths. They are lessons, warnings wrapped in mystery, guidance woven into shadow. They teach that fear, if allowed to grow, will consume, that sorrow, left unchecked, can invite darkness, that respect for the land, for the spirits, for the unseen is essential. Even today, in the deep forests of the American South, some still claim to see shadows moving where no shadow should be, to hear whispers in the wind calling their name, to feel an unseen presence just beyond the firelight. Perhaps these stories are more than legend. Perhaps the shadows still watch, waiting for those who forget the lessons of them. There are beings that have walked beside us since the dawn of time, unseen yet always present. Some whisper their secrets in the wind, others watch from the shadows. In the folklore of the Middle East and Islamic tradition, they are known as Djinn, enigmatic spirits woven into the fabric of human existence. Before the creation of mankind, before the shaping of clay, there was smokeless fire. From this ethereal substance, the Djinn were born. In Islamic tradition, they are neither angels nor demons, but something entirely their own. Beings of free will, capable of both great good and terrible mischief. The Quran speaks of them, as do the ancient stories whispered in the desert wind. Legends say that long before humans, the Djinn ruled the earth. They lived in their own civilizations, with kings, warriors, and poets. Some claim that ruins left in the deserts and mountains are not the remnants of human hands, but of lost cities of the Djinn. The Quran dedicates an entire chapter, the Surah Al-Jinn, to these shadowy beings. It tells of a group of Jinn who listened to the recitation of the holy verses and embraced the message. Unlike the common image of spirits that only seek to harm, Islamic tradition acknowledges both good and evil Jinn, believers and non-believers. One of the most infamous of their kind is Iblis, a Jinn who refused to bow before Adam. In his defiance, he became accursed. Shaitan, the adversary, some say that his kind still walk among us, whispering doubts, kindling fear, leading astray. Not all Jinn are the same. Across centuries of storytelling, different names have surfaced, each carrying its own mystery. The Marid, powerful and often arrogant, are the most well-known in folklore, capable of granting wishes, but at a price. The Ifrit, wreathed in flames, are cunning and dangerous, often depicted as vengeful spirits lurking in ruins. The Sila, rare, known for their wisdom and shape-shifting abilities, blending between human and Jinn. The Ghoul, creatures of the night, scavengers of the dead, lurking where the boundaries of the living and the dead blur. And then there are those simply called Jinn, beings of smokeless fire who dwell in the unseen corners of the world. Even today, belief in the Jinn is widespread. In some cultures, people take precautions, avoiding lonely places after sunset, whispering prayers before entering unfamiliar ground. In homes, small acts of courtesy are observed. Doors are gently closed instead of slammed. Names are spoken with care, for one never knows when an unseen presence may be listening. There are those who claim to have encountered them, a shadow moving without a body, a whisper in an empty room, a chill that lingers where none should be. Stories of Jinn possessions, of homes haunted by unseen forces, persist in folklore and first-hand accounts alike. For as long as people have feared the Jinn, they have sought protection. Incantations, verses from holy books, talismans of silver and iron. Each culture has its ways of warding off the unseen. Some say that reciting the Ayat Kursi, a powerful verse from the Quran, can drive away malevolent spirits. Others place salt at thresholds, burn incense, or avoid speaking too loudly after dark. But the Djinn are not merely creatures of fear. They are part of the unseen world, intertwined with our own. Not all seek harm, and some, it is said, simply wish to exist in peace. And so the Djinn remain forever just beyond the veil, shadows in the moonlight, whispers in the wind, memories of ancient tales passed from one generation to the next. Perhaps as you drift into sleep, you'll hear them too. A distant echo, a soft hum beneath the night silence. But worry not, for the night is long, and the stories will always be here to keep you company. There is something strangely comforting about the sound of a voice drifting through the radio waves in the middle of the night. The deep hours when the world is quiet and the mind is open. It is in these moments that the mysterious takes root, whispering stories of the unknown, the unexplained, and the eerie shadows that seem to lurk just beyond the veil of understanding. For decades, one show has been a beacon for night owls, insomniacs, truck drivers, and seekers of the strange. Coast to Coast AM, the legendary late-night radio show, has captivated listeners with tales of UFOs, government conspiracies, near-death experiences, and encounters with the supernatural. But among all the unsettling and fascinating topics covered, one subject in particular took on a life of its own, a phenomenon that many claim to have seen, but few can fully explain: the shadow people. Tonight, we journey into the history of Coast to Coast AM, exploring how this unassuming radio show became the cultural epicenter for tales of shadow people. We'll hear from the voices that define the program, the chilling accounts that gripped its audience, and the legacy that lingers in the quiet hours of the night. To understand the phenomenon of shadow people, we must first step back and trace the origins of the show that brought them into the public consciousness. Coast to Coast AM was founded in the 1980s by a man named Art Bell, broadcasting from the deserts of Nevada. Bell's voice became synonymous with the weird and wonderful. His open-minded curiosity and willingness to entertain the bizarre gave his show a distinctive, almost hypnotic allure. The program became a safe haven for those with strange experiences, a place where the incredible was treated with seriousness and the mysterious was given space to breathe. Callers dialed in with stories of lost time, cryptic dreams, and encounters with beings not of this world. The late-night airwaves became a tapestry woven with intrigue, and soon, one particular story began emerging more and more frequently. The concept of shadowy figures appearing in the dead of night is not new. Legends of dark entities can be found in cultures around the world, from the Djinn of the Middle Eastern folklore to the Hat Man of modern urban legends, but it was Coast to Coast AM that gave a name to these figures, catapulted them into the mainstream consciousness. The conversation gained momentum in April 2001 when a guest named Heidi Hollis joined the program. She was among the first to formally identify and name the entities as shadow people. She described them as dark, humanoid figures, sometimes with glowing red eyes, that appear in bedrooms, hallways, and dimly lit corners. Unlike ghosts, they were not spirits of the dead, but something else entirely, something more sinister. The response was overwhelming. Listeners flooded the lines, counting their own chilling encounters. Some reported fleeting glimpses of figures standing at the foot of their bed, dissolving the moment they were fully perceived. Others described an oppressive presence, an overwhelming feeling of dread as the figures watched in silence. The phenomenon of shadow people divided the coast-to-coast audience. Were they interdimensional beings, visitors from another plane of existence, or simply a trick of the mind? Sleep paralysis manifesting as an external force. The scientific explanation points to hypnagogia, a state between waking and sleeping where the mind can create vivid hallucinations. Neurologists suggest that the brain, in its twilight state, can project fears into the surrounding environment. But for those who have stood paralyzed in their bed, feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon them, those rational explanations offer little comfort. Some researchers believe shadow people could be entities feeding off human energy, lingering in the liminal space between the physical and the ethereal. Others claim they are time travelers, watching but never interfering. Whatever the truth may be, the sheer volume of personal testimonies suggests that something is happening, something beyond mere imagination. As the years passed, Coast to Coast AM remained a sanctuary for the unusual. Art Bell eventually stepped away from the microphone, but the show continued under new hosts, each carrying the torch of late-night wonder. The legend of shadow people endured, cementing itself in popular culture through books, documentaries, and even films. Yet beyond the theories and the stories, one undeniable truth remains. There is something about the night that awakens the mind to the unknown, something about the stillness that makes us more aware of things that linger in the periphery of our vision. Perhaps the real question isn't whether shadow people are real, but why so many of us have seen them. Is it the power of suggestion, a deep-rooted archetype buried within the human psyche, or could it be, in the quietest hours of the night, we're simply more attuned to what has always been there? Whatever the answer may be, one thing is certain. The night still holds its secrets, and somewhere, someone is listening, waiting, watching. To understand shadow people, we must first understand the woman who has tirelessly sought to expose them. Heidi Hollis is an author, researcher, and paranormal investigator known for coining the term shadow people. Her work spans decades, bringing together personal experiences, testimonies, and theories about these elusive entities. Born with a deep curiosity about the unknown, Hollis has spent years listening to those who have seen the unexplainable, gathering accounts that challenge her perception of reality. Her books, interviews, and radio appearances have painted a compelling picture, one that suggests these dark figures are more than mere hallucinations or tricks of the eye. The phenomenon of shadow people across cultures and generations. There are stories of shadowy beings lurking just beyond the veil of darkness. Some describe them as fleeting, disappearing the moment they are noticed. Others report terrifying encounters, red glowing eyes, suffocating pressure, an overwhelming sense of dread. Hollis believes shadow people are not merely ghosts or spirits, but something far more sinister. According to her, they are entities with a purpose, some benign, some malicious, and others beyond human comprehension. But why do they appear? What do they want? Many who have encountered shadow people recall a similar experience, waking up in the dead of night, unable to move, only to find a dark figure looming over them. Sleep paralysis, some say. But what if these figures are more than just the byproducts of a dreaming mind? Hollis has collected countless accounts from individuals who have seen these beings while fully awake, walking through hallways, standing at the foot of their beds, even following them in broad daylight. Their presence often leaves behind an undeniable imprint of fear, an unshakable feeling that something was truly there. There are many theories regarding shadow people. Some believe they're interdimensional beings slipping through the cracks of our reality. Others argue they're demonic entities, feeding on human fear. Still, there are those who suggest they're watchers, silent observers of human existence. Hollis herself has described a particularly menacing type of shadow person, known as the Hat Man. Unlike other shadowy figures that vanish quickly, the Hat Man lingers, watching with an ominous presence. Some believe he's a harbinger of doom, appearing before moments of tragedy or despair. While the supernatural theories are compelling, some researchers propose a psychological explanation. The phenomenon could be linked to sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucinations, or the mind's ability to create patterns in darkness. The human brain is wired to recognize faces and figures, even where none exist. Could shadow people be a trick of perception, a primal fear manifesting in our subconscious? Regardless of the origins of shadow people, one thing remains clear. Many who experience them seek ways to protect themselves. Hollis advises that fear feeds these entities. By rejecting their presence and embracing positivity, individuals can diminish their influence. Spiritual protections, prayers, energy cleansing techniques, many have found solace in these methods. Whether one views shadow people as entities or mind-born phantoms, finding peace is essential to overcoming the fear they induce. And so, as we close this chapter on the shadow people in Heidi Hollis' research, we are left with more questions than answers. Are they beings from beyond our realm, feeding on fear? Are they echoes of something long forgotten, lingering in the dark corners of our perception? Or are they simply the mind's attempt to make sense of the unknown? Have you ever been alone at night, only to hear an unexpected knock at your door? The kind that sends a strange chill down your spine before you even reach for the handle? What if, upon opening it, you found two children standing there, silent, motionless, waiting for something from you? Their voices are soft, their request simple: let us in. The legend of the black-eyed kids, often abbreviated as BEKs, first gained widespread attention in the late 1990s when journalist Brian Bethel shared a chilling encounter he had in Abilene, Texas. He described two boys appearing somewhere between the ages of 10 and 14 who approached his car in a dimly lit parking lot. They asked for a ride. Their speech was unnerving, too formal, too rehearsed, and when he finally looked into their eyes, he was overwhelmed with inexplicable dread. They were entirely black. No iris, no whites, just an abyss. Since then, reports have surfaced across the world, each following a disturbingly similar pattern. These children appear at doors, outside cars, on lonely roadsides, always requesting entry, always invoking an unnatural fear. And those who let them in, if you ever meet them, one thing is clear: they need your permission. They ask, sometimes demand, to be let in. But why? Some encounters suggest that those who grant them entry experience a slow but inevitable descent into misfortune, illness, nightmares, bad luck, and in some cases, death. Their clothing is often outdated or mismatched, as if they don't quite understand human fashion. Their skin can appear pale, almost artificial. Some witnesses report a suffocating sense of dread, as if their very presence drains the energy from the air. Others describe an unnatural silence surrounding them, no crickets, no wind, no sound at all. Is it psychological, or is it something else at play? There are many theories about what the black-eyed kids might be. Some believe they're supernatural entities, demons in disguise, vampires bound by ancient rules, or even interdimensional beings trying to blend in. Others suggest a more scientific explanation. Could they be the result of mass hysteria, a modern folktale that thrived in the age of the internet? Some skeptics argue that sleep paralysis or suggestibility could play a role in why these stories feel so terrifyingly real, and yet too many stories share the same details, too many witnesses describe the same fear. Let's take a moment to hear some of the most unsettling encounters ever reported. One night in 2012, a man in rural Vermont was home alone when he heard a knock at his door. Standing outside were two children, a boy and a girl, no older than 12. Their heads were lowered, their voices eerily synchronized. "We need to come inside," they said. "Our parents will be here soon." An overwhelming dread overtook him, but he found himself stepping aside anyway. It was only when his eyes adjusted to the dim lighting that he noticed their faces, ashen, unnatural, and those black, endless eyes. Moments later, his nose began bleeding. His vision blurred. The children simply sat, unmoving, until suddenly they stood in unison and said, "Our parents are here." He saw nothing outside but darkness, and then they were gone. Months later, he was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. Coincidence or something more sinister? Fear has a way of bending reality. It amplifies the unknown, transforms shadows into figures, silence into whispers. The black-eyed kids be an extension of our primal fears, a manifestation of something lurking deep in our subconscious, or are they truly something beyond explanation? Paranormal investigators believe that they might be linked to shadow people, ghosts, or even extraterrestrial entities that disguise themselves to interact with humans. Some speculate they're experiments designed to test human reaction, to push boundaries. And yet, despite all of our speculation, one question remains: what happens if you let them in? The next time you hear a knock at your door late at night, listen closely. Do you hear the wind, the rustling of leaves, or is it unnaturally silent? You open the door and see two small figures standing there, eyes lowered, voices soft and insistent. You might want to think twice before inviting them in, because once you do, there's no telling what comes next. There are things that lurked in the twilight between the waking world and the realm of shadows. Whispers from ancient Mesopotamian clay tablets speak of spirits that drift between the living and the dead, forgotten names lost to time, yet lingering still. Alû, Edimmu. Their presence was feared in the silent hours of the night, their touch cold as the void. What were these entities? What did our ancestors believe about them? Tonight, we drift into the past through the veil of history, where echoes of the dead still murmur in the desert winds. To understand the Alû and Edimmu, we must first journey back thousands of years to the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia. Between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, mighty cities rose from the dust, and with them, a belief system rich in gods, demons, and spirits. The people of Sumer, Akkad, Assyria, and Babylon lived in a world where the divine and the supernatural were ever present. The afterlife was not a place of peace, but a realm of shadows. In this shadowy realm, the restless dead lingered. Unlike the later Abrahamic traditions, Mesopotamian spirituality did not promise a heaven for the righteous or eternal torment for the wicked. Instead, all souls traveled to the underworld, Urkala, the dark and dusty realm, ruled by Ereshkigal. There, the dead were little more than whispers, their presence a pale echo of life. But some did not stay, some returned, and it is these restless dead that we must now turn our attention to. The Edimmu were among the most feared spirits of ancient Mesopotamia. They were the unburied, forgotten, forsaken souls who had been denied proper funerary rites. To die without burial meant to be trapped between worlds, neither fully dead nor truly gone. These spirits were not merely ghosts, they were ravenous, desperate. They wandered the earth seeking sustenance, draining the life force from the living. Some whisper that they drank the breath of sleeping victims, leaving them sickly, weak, and fevered upon waking. Others believe they caused madness, slipping into a person's mind like a serpent in the dark. To the people of Mesopotamia, the presence of an Edimmu was not merely an inconvenience. It was a dire threat. Priests and magicians devised incantations to banish them, offerings to appease them, and protective talismans to ward them off. But still, the Edimmu came, creeping through the silent hours of the night, unseen but felt like a whisper of, if the Edimmu were the starving dead, then the Alû was something far more sinister. Unlike the Edimmu, Alû was not necessarily the spirit of a neglected soul, but a being of a nightmare. A demon that lurked in the darkness. It was formless, a living shadow. It did not have a voice, nor did it make a sound. Instead, it crept upon its victims as they lay in bed, wrapping them in silence, stealing their breath and paralyzing their limbs. Sound familiar? It should. The experience of sleep paralysis has been described for centuries, often associated with supernatural entities that attack under cover of night. The Alû was one of the earliest recorded examples of this terrifying phenomenon. Those who encountered it would find themselves unable to move, suffocating in its grasp, their screams locked inside their own throats. It would sit upon their chest, its unseen weight pressing them deeper into the void of sleep. The Mesopotamians believed that such spirits could be repelled through ritual purification, amulets, and the favor of protective deities. The gods of healing and protection, such as Ea and Marduk, were invoked to drive away these dark presences. And yet, even now, long after the temples of Mesopotamia have crumbled into dust, people still report encounters with shadowy figures that press upon their chest in the dead of night. What remains of these ancient fears in our modern world? The belief in spirits that steal the breath, cause nightmares, or lurk in the shadows is not confined to Mesopotamia. The Night Hag of European folklore, the Djinn of Arabian legend, the shadow people of modern paranormal accounts, all bear striking similarities to the Edimmu and Alû. Have these beings evolved with our fears, changing the names and appearances as centuries passed? Or is it that deep in our collective unconscious that we still sense something lurking in the night, just as our ancestors did? Perhaps, in the end, the true power of these spirits lies not in their existence, but in their endurance. Myths may change, beliefs may shift, but the fear of the unseen, the whisper in the dark, the weight upon our chest as we drift between waking and sleep, that remains. The word revenant finds its origins in the Latin revenire, to return, and that's precisely what these beings do. They return when they should not, stepping from the grave to walk among the living once more. Unlike the modern ghost, which often lingers unseen, revenants are corporeal. They claw their way from burial mounds, visit their loved ones, and sometimes they seek vengeance. Medieval Europe was rife with the tales of the revenant, describing them as bloated, ruddy, and filled with the essence of decay. In the 12th century writings of William of Newburgh, we find chilling accounts of the dead rising from their graves, tormenting the living until they are exhumed and destroyed. These were not souls in search of peace, they were nightmares made flesh. But why did the revenants rise? Many believe it was due to unfinished business, improper burials, or even the result of sin so great that the earth itself refused to hold them. Others whispered that they were heralds of plague, omens of disaster, or the cursed remains of the wicked. If the revenant is the body made restless, then the shadow spirit is the ghost of its ghost, a lingering imprint of a soul unable to fully cross over. These are the beings that flicker in the corners of your vision, the dark silhouettes that appear in doorways, standing motionless, watching. Unlike traditional ghosts, they lack features. They are darkless given form. Cultures around the world tell of shadow spirits, and though their interpretations vary, the present remains eerily consistent. In ancient Mesopotamian lore, just like the Alû, malevolent spirits of those who had not received proper burials, they drifted as shadows, whispering into the ears of the living, bringing sickness and misfortune. In Japan, the Yuri, often associated with a lack of proper rites, could manifest as shadowy spirits, tethered to the world by sorrow or vengeance. But what if these figures are not spirits of the dead at all? Some believe shadow entities belong to an entirely different category of being, interdimensional observers, demonic presences, or even echoes of ourselves from parallel realities. Theories abound, but one thing remains consistent. Those who encounter them rarely forget the feelings of being watched. The fear of the restless dead has driven humanity to elaborate funerary rites, rituals, and protections. In parts of Eastern Europe, gravesites were salted, iron nails driven through corpses, and mouths stuffed with stones to prevent revenants from rising. In many cultures, mirrors were covered after death to prevent the soul from becoming trapped. Some tales tell of bells being tied to graves, a final precaution in case dead were not as dead as they seemed. Yet despite all these safeguards, stories of encounters persist. Accounts of shadow figures watching from the corners of dimly lit rooms, footsteps pacing empty halls, of the sensation of breath on the nape of one's neck when no one is there. Science offers explanations, of course: sleep paralysis, psychological phenomena, tricks of light, but even as rationality attempts to explain them away, the stories continue. Perhaps in the stillness of the night, when the barriers are at their thinnest, the dead still walk, perhaps they always have walked, and we are simply the ones who have forgotten how to see them. As the night deepens and the world outside falls silent, the revenant and the shadow spirits retreat into the darkness from which they came. But do they ever truly leave, or do they simply wait until we close our eyes, until our minds slip into the threshold between waking and dreams? Across the wind-swept moors and the dense whispering forests of ancient Europe, there exists a tale both wondrous and terrifying. A legend of spectral riders galloping through the night, their howls carried by the wind, their purpose unknown, an omen of war, death, and misfortune. This is the tale of the Wild Hunt. But the Wild Hunt is not only shadowy presence haunting the fringes of human perception. Shadowy figures seen just beyond the veil of waking consciousness have been reported across cultures and centuries. Who or what are these spectral entities? Are they mere figments of the mind, or do they belong to something far older and far darker? The legend of the wild hunt stretches across time and place, taking different forms in various cultures. In Norse mythology, it is led by Odin, the one-eyed wanderer, riding his mighty steed Sleipnir, a beast with 8 legs that carries its master between the realms of the living and the dead. In Germanic and Anglo-Saxon folklore, it is known as the Wilde Hag, or Herla's Hunt, a ghostly procession of riders cutting through the midnight sky. Those who witness the hunt are said to be cursed, sometimes whisked away to join its ranks, other times left with an omen of impending disaster. It is a chase with no beginning and no end, a spectral force that emerges from the mist. Across the British Isles, the hunt is led by a shadowy figure known as Heron the Hunter, a spectral huntsman tied to the forests of Windsor. In Wales, the hunt takes the form of Sin Anwen, ghostly hounds with glowing red eyes led by a figure named Arwen, ruler of the otherworld. The Celts believe that these hounds could pull souls from the land of the living into the world beyond. Further east, in Slavic mythology, the wild hunt blends with tales of dark spirits and wandering souls. Some say the hunt is composed of the restless dead, riding through the skies, searching for those who have wronged them in life. In each telling, the theme remains: the hunt is a harbinger, a force neither good nor evil, but undeniably powerful. But what if the wild hunt is not just a legend? What if the figures who ride beneath the storm-filled skies are connected to another phenomenon, one that lingers even in the modern era: shadow people? Reports of shadowy entities have persisted for centuries, described by those who wake in the night to see featureless, dark figures lurking at the edge of their vision. Unlike ghosts, these beings are not misty or transparent. They are darker than the night itself, silhouettes that seem to absorb all light. Some are passive watchers standing at a distance. Others feel more malevolent, appearing in moments of sleep paralysis or near the boundaries of consciousness. Could the wild hunt and the shadow people be two sides of the same mystery? Both are fleeting, seen only by those who are either unlucky or perhaps attuned. Both bring an air of fear and wonder, and both seem to exist outside of time, reappearing in different ages and cultures under new names. Science tells us that our minds are prone to seeing patterns in the dark, that sleep paralysis can conjure terrifying hallucinations, and that folklore fills in the gaps of our understanding. Then, there are the stories of those who swear they have heard hooves thundering in the sky on stormy nights, of travelers who vanished after encountering a group of phantom riders, of strange figures lingering in doorways, slipping between shadows and substance, seen just before disaster strikes. So what do you believe? Are these merely myths, born from our collective imagination, or is there truth behind legends, hidden just beyond the reach of our waking mind? The night is young, and the wild hunt rides on. Whether you sleep soundly or keep one eye open for the shadows in the dark, know this: somewhere in the deep of night, something stirs. Have you ever felt like someone was watching you, even when you were completely alone? A shadowy figure lurking in the corner of your vision, only to disappear when you turn to look? These eerie encounters have been reported for centuries, taking on countless forms, from shadow people to ghostly apparitions. But what if there was a scientific explanation, a hidden force that moves through the air, beyond our ability to hear, yet powerful enough to make us feel haunted? Infrasound exists all around us, yet most of us never even notice it. There are sound waves that vibrate at frequencies lower than 20 hertz, beneath the threshold of human hearing. While we cannot consciously hear them, our bodies can still feel them. These deep vibrations can come from natural sources, thunderstorms, earthquakes, and even ocean waves, or they can be generated by human-made structures like engines, wind turbines, and industrial machinery. Scientists have long suspected that infrasound can influence the human mind in strange and unexpected ways. In the right conditions, it can create feelings of unease, dizziness, and even intense fear. Some researchers believe it could be the reason why people feel an unseen presence in supposedly haunted locations. But could it also be responsible for shadow people encounters? Let's dive deeper. Our brains are highly sensitive to sound, even those we cannot hear. When exposed to infrasound, people have reported feelings of anxiety, chills, and even full-blown panic. This response is deeply wired into our evolutionary survival instincts. Low-frequency sounds often signal danger, like an approaching predator or an impending natural disaster, so our bodies react instinctively, heightening our senses and preparing us to flee. Experiments have shown that exposure to infrasound can make people feel like they are being watched, or that there is a presence in the room with them. In one study, scientists played infrasound along music at a live concert, and audience members described feeling uneasy, sorrowful, or suddenly cold without knowing that infrasound was being used. Could it be that many supernatural experiences are simply our brains misinterpreting an invisible force? Many who have seen shadow people describe a similar set of symptoms: an overwhelming fear of dread, sudden chills, and the sense that they are not alone. Sometimes, these shadowy figures appear as fleeting movements in the peripheral vision. Other times, they seem to loom in the doorways or corners, watching silently. But if infrasound can generate the feeling of an unseen presence, could it also trick our brains into creating shadowy figures out of thin air? Vision, like hearing, can be influenced by vibrations. Some researchers speculate that infrasound might cause slight distortions in the eye, leading to brief visual disturbances. These distortions, combined with heightened fear, could make the brain fill in the gaps, turning flickers of light and shadow into humanoid figures. If infrasound can create ghostly sensations, where is it coming from? In nature, infrasound is generated by earthquakes roaming through the earth, by the deep calls of large animals like elephants, and even by weather phenomena like windstorms and thunder. Some haunted locations, especially old castles and cathedrals, were built in areas where wind and stone can produce subtle, droning infrasound. But in modern life, we are surrounded by artificial sources as well. Air conditioning units, engines, and even large empty spaces in buildings can create low-frequency vibrations. Could it be that some hauntings aren't hauntings at all, but the effects of infrasound traveling through a structure? One of the most famous cases linking infrasound to hauntings comes from a research scientist named Vic Tandy. While working in a lab, Tandy began experiencing an overwhelming sense of dread. He would catch glimpses of dark shapes in his peripheral vision, but when he turned, nothing was there. Eventually, he traced the cause to a fan in the lab, which was emitting a low-frequency hum. When the fan was turned off, the ghostly sensations disappeared. Other researchers have tried to recreate this effect in controlled settings. Some have placed test subjects in soundproof rooms where they are exposed to infrasound at barely perceptible levels. Again and again, people report feeling uneasy, seeing flickering shapes, or sensing that something is lurking just outside their sight. Infrasound may also play a role in sleep disturbances. People who live near sources of infrasound, such as wind turbines, sometimes report experiencing night terrors or waking up in a panic. This raises an interesting question. Could infrasound explain the terrifying encounters of sleep paralysis? Many sleep paralysis episodes involve shadowy figures looming over the bed or pressing down on the chest. Hallucinations that can be amplified by the brain's response to low-frequency vibrations. If infrasound can make us feel watched, disrupt our vision, and trigger fear responses deep within our brains, then perhaps many of our encounters with the unknown are not supernatural at all, but deeply rooted in science. Of course, that doesn't mean shadow people and other entities don't exist, but it does mean that, sometimes, the explanation is hiding in a place we least expect. Have you ever woken up in the dead of night, only to feel an unsettling presence in the corner of your room? A dark figure standing motionless, or perhaps moving just beyond the reach of your vision? You blink, your breath catches in your throat, but when you turn on the light, there's nothing there. This is the experience reported by countless people throughout history, an encounter with what many call the shadow people. Some believe these figures are supernatural, spirits, interdimensional beings, or even harbingers of something more sinister. But what if there is another explanation? One grounded in science, psychology, neuroscience, and even environmental factors. Imagine this. You wake up, but your body is completely frozen. You try to move, but no matter how hard you try, you can't lift a finger. And then you see it. A dark figure standing by your bed, watching you. You want to scream, but your voice won't come out. This terrifying experience is known as sleep paralysis. It occurs when the brain wakes up while the body remains in a temporary state of paralysis, a natural function designed to keep us from acting out in our dreams. During this state, the brain can create vivid hallucinations. Many people report seeing dark shapes or figures, often described as shadow people. But why does the brain conjure up these eerie images? One theory suggests that during sleep paralysis, the brain is in a confused, in-between state, partly asleep, partly awake. The amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for fear, becomes hyperactive, making us more likely to perceive threats. The result? Our subconscious takes vaguely sensory input, like a shadow in the room, and transforms it into something terrifying. But this isn't the only explanation. The human brain is wired to find patterns in randomness. It's a survival mechanism, an ancient instinct designed to keep us safe. When we see a vague shadow in a dark room, our brain immediately tries to assign meaning to it. This phenomenon is called pareidolia. It's the same reason we see faces in clouds, hear voices in white noise, or perceive figures lurking in the dark when we're alone. Psychologists suggest that shadow people could be the result of hyperactive agency detection, a tendency to assume that ambiguous stimuli represent a living presence. This is deeply rooted in our evolutionary past, when mistaking a shadow for a predator was far less dangerous than failing to recognize a real threat. Late at night, when our senses are dulled and our imagination takes over, shadows shift and flicker, and suddenly, an ordinary coat rack or a trick of the light becomes something else entirely. The way we perceive the world is shaped by stories we tell. The concept of shadow people is not new. It has existed across cultures for centuries. Ancient folklore speaks of dark spirits, watchers, and shadowy beings. In modern times, popular shows, books, and internet forums have given shape to these entities, reinforcing the idea that they exist. When we hear stories of shadow people, our minds become primed to expect them. This is known as the expectation effect. If we strongly believe in something, we are more likely to perceive it, especially in the moments of fear, exhaustion, or sleep disruption. The mind, it seems, is a powerful architect of our reality. Our eyes do not see reality as it is. They interpret light and shadow, constantly adjusting for depth and motion. In low light, our peripheral vision becomes less reliable, making objects seem to move or shift when they are actually still. Light pollution, flickering streetlights, and even the glow from digital screens can create unusual shadows. Some researchers suggest that electromagnetic fields may also play a role. High EMF exposure has been linked to feelings of paranoia, hallucinations, and the sensation of an unseen presence. Could it be that certain environments, with their electrical signals and fluctuating shadows, are tricking our minds into seeing things that aren't there? Even the brain itself can create shadowy figures. A phenomenon called Charles Bonnet syndrome causes the brain to generate hallucinations when it lacks sufficient visual input, meaning that in extreme darkness, our brains may create images that seem incredibly real. So what are shadow people? Are they merely illusions of the mind, born from sleep paralysis, psychological pattern recognition, and environmental factors? Or is there something more? The answer may lie in the space between science and the unknown. After all, what we call reality is simply how our brains interpret the world around us. One of the most popular theories in paranormal circles is that shadow people are interdimensional entities. This idea is rooted in the concept of parallel universes, realms that exist alongside our own but remain invisible to us under normal circumstances. Some believe that shadow people are inhabitants of these other dimensions who occasionally slip through the veil that separates our worlds. Physicists have long speculated about the existence of higher dimensions. Theoretical models such as string theory suggest that multiple dimensions may exist beyond the three spatial dimensions we experience. If true, it is conceivable that beings from these unseen realms could manifest in our world, appearing as fleeting, shadowy figures. Some proponents of this theory argue that shadow people might not be fully in our dimension, causing them to appear translucent or partially formed. Accounts of shadow people often describe them as moving unnaturally fast or vanishing in an instant. If these entities are indeed interdimensional travelers, this might explain why they seem to defy the laws of physics. Some experiencers even report feelings of distortion in space and time when encountering shadow figures, further fueling speculation that these beings are connected to dimensional rifts. Another widely held belief is that shadow people are spirits of the deceased who have not moved on. Unlike traditional ghostly apparitions, which are often described as having visible features, shadow people are dark, featureless, and sometimes menacing. This has led some to theorize that they represent souls trapped in a current state of unrest. Many cultures hold beliefs about spirits existing in various forms after death. In ancient Mesopotamian mythology, the Edimmu were considered restless spirits that wandered in the darkness, unable to find peace. Similarly, certain ghost stories from around the world describe shadowy apparitions as omens or lost souls searching for resolution. Could shadow people be a modern manifestation of these old-age spirits? Some paranormal investigators suggest that shadow people may appear in places where tragedy or suffering occurred, much like traditional hauntings. The negative energy of such locations might fuel their presence, leading to increased sightings. Reports of shadow figures in old hospitals, battlefields, and abandoned buildings lend credence to this idea. A more speculative theory posits that shadow people could be time travelers from our own distant future. If we ever develop the ability to move through time, it is possible that future humans, or even post-human entities, might observe the past without directly interfering. The shadowy appearance of these figures might result from limitations in the technology that allows them to travel through time. Perhaps they cannot fully materialize, leading to their ghost-like form. Some experiencers claim that shadow people seem to watch them, sometimes standing silently at a distance. Could these beings be historians or scientists from the future, studying us without making direct contact? One particularly eerie thought is that shadow people might not be intentionally watching us at all. Instead, they could be unaware that they are being perceived, much like how a person might walk through a foggy mirror without realizing that someone on the other side can see their vague reflection. Beyond interdimensional beings, spirits, and time travelers, there are even stranger theories about shadow people that have emerged over time. Demonic entities. Some religious perspectives view shadow people as demonic forces that thrive on fear. Their dark forms' unsettling presence have led many to associate them with malevolent supernatural beings. Astral projections gone wrong. Some people believe that shadow people could be the result of accidental astral projection, where individuals subconsciously leave their bodies and are perceived by others as dark, shadowy figures. Sentient energy forms. Certain mystics propose that shadow people might be non-human entities composed entirely of energy, existing in a state beyond our current understanding of consciousness. After examining these paranormal theories, one thing becomes clear. The mystery of shadow people endures. Whether they are interdimensional travelers, spirits of the dead, time watchers, or something entirely beyond our comprehension, their presence has fascinated and terrified people for centuries. While science attempts to explain them through sleep paralysis, infrasound, and psychological factors, the countless personal encounters suggest that something more may be at play. In the end, the nature of shadow people may never be fully understood. They exist in the space between science and the supernatural, between waking and dreaming, between reality and imagination. Perhaps that is what makes them so terrifying. They are the embodiment of the unknown. As we wrap up this journey into the world of shadow people, take a moment to reflect on your own experiences. Have you ever felt a presence in the room when no one was there? Seen a fleeting shadow out of the corner of your eye? Whether real or imagined, shadow people continue to haunt our collective consciousness, a reminder that the darkness holds secrets we have yet to uncover.
Well, I've had a shadow person experience, which honestly scared the tar out of me, Nick. I'm sorry, but it terrorized me. In my ham shack at the main house, about 2-3 weeks before the show, doing research for the show, late at night, and there was one. I looked to my right. I guess something caught my eye. I looked to the right, and here was this. Now that you mention it, probably not very tall at all, about 5 feet tall, a human body, not arms extended. Arms would be down, but you could tell it was a human-like or humanoid type body. That's about as far as I can go. You could actually see through it partially. And I startled, and I started to turn around, and the damn thing was behind me, and again I could see through it. And then I'm at this point really freaked out, and I turned to my left, which is where the door would be to get the heck out of that room. And there it was to my left. It eventually just went kind of like that, and it was gone. But it was real. I'm telling you, Nick, it was a real something. I don't know what. But are you saying there is a relationship between these sort of shadow people or whatever they are and Men in Black?
Oh, yeah. I mean, one of the interesting things that just stood out for me, what you just said, that, you saw this shadow person when you were doing research for the show, etc. Well, this actually ties in with this paper that Brad Steiger did for the book, where Brad was looking into things, and it was as if the Men in Black knew. In other words, in the same way that he was doing research and they seemed to know and began threatening him, and also via his friends, you were looking into something and they seemed to know, in the sense that they appeared or one appeared. And I get that so much in Men in Black and Hat Man and Shadow People type reports, where it's like when you kind of think of them, they seem to have an awareness that people are thinking of them, and they can lock onto the people who might, if you like, be looking for the answers, and then they can target them with a potential threat. But I mean, within the shadow people controversy, which again I talk about in the book, there's this sort of subcategory known as the Hat Man, which looks like a shadow person in the sense that it's shadowy, but like the Men in Black, it's typically seen wearing an old style fedora, but often it's described as like a black silhouette rather than having sort of a substantial form. It's sort of a cross between a physical entity and a spectre, if you like. But the outline looks like a man in black. And then there's another one which is often seen in like a black suit and often a fedora as well, known as a grinning man, where it has this sort of macabre grin on its face, almost sort of just static, unmoving, as if that's its only the only impression, the only sort of face it has, and they're sort of amongst the sort of creepiest stories of the grinning man, that people have seen these things. You know, they'll wake up in the middle of the night unable to move, and there's this very often tall and thin, you know, actually the opposite, the men in black are quite small, but tall and thin, wearing a black suit, skinny black tie, black fedora, white face, but has this sort of really malevolent grin on its face, just staring at the person. You know, those reports are, I mean, I know from the people I've spoken to and written about it, probably, I mean, amongst some of the most chilling ones.
Shadow people, are they the remnants of forgotten spirits, the tricks of a fearful mind, or something that exists just beyond the limits of human perception? Science may offer explanations, but for those who have encountered them, the fear is real, the paralysis is real, the presence is real. Maybe they're just figments of our imagination. Maybe they thrive in the gaps of our understanding. But here's a question to leave you with. If they're only in our minds, why do so many people see them? Why do the accounts stretch across cultures, continents, and centuries? And most importantly, why do some say that once you've seen them, they never truly leave you? Sleep well, if you can.